Hey, what's up? Today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about new atheism and why I think it's stupid. So, in my in my video about the second part of the Harris Peterson talk, I had a comment on that video that I should do another video about why I think the new atheists reject God or reject religion on superficial grounds, I think was the terminology I used or he used. And so, obviously in that talk, Peterson and Harris, uh, Peterson describes himself as a deeply religious person, and he's very interested in symbolism and mysticism that comes from religious stories. And Sam Harris is famous, or perhaps infamous, for being one of the new atheists and one of the four horsemen, along with Dawkins, Hitchens, and Dennett. Um, so obviously, they have two totally different conceptions about what religion actually means and what the concept of God is. So they're naturally going to talk past one another, and that's exactly what happened in that talk. Although it was much more civil than their first meeting, there was still an ontological roadblock there as far as like coming to some common ground, common understanding of what religion is. What does it mean? What does it help us to do? That sort of thing. And I think those are the questions that Peterson is actually interested in, and that Harris isn't going to explore at all on principle alone. And that's why I would regard Peterson as a much higher and much more worthy of respect public intellectual. And another reason why I can't take someone like Harris seriously is because there are certain questions that he is simply going to avoid, and same is the case with the other new atheists. Anyway, I'm just going to go through a few very common new atheistic arguments against the existence of God or religion, and I'm just going to, explain why I think those aren't good reasons, or what the fundamental problems are with them. So Richard Dawkins has spoken before of this theistic spectrum from 1 to 7, where someone who's at a 1 is totally religious, believes that God exists, and someone who's at a 7 completely denies or rejects the idea that God exists. And that someone who's right in the middle at a 4 out of 7 is an agnostic, and claims that there's either a 50-50 probability that God exists, or something or the other. So, okay, that's just a quick little Dawkins-ish tidbit. Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, famous, probably the most famous of the new atheists, and one of the most powerful speakers on the issue. His fundamental idea was that the probability is so low that you shouldn't believe in God. The probability that he exists is so low you shouldn't believe in it. And that it won't help us with objective inquiry. And that's what we should focus on, is rationality and science and stuff. Philosopher John Searle, not as radical an atheist as the others, but certainly an ontological agnostic, we could call him. He would say that the rational person would be agnostic because one can't demonstrate a universal negative, nor can one demonstrate a universal affirmative, right? So you can't be entirely empirically certain of anything. Fair enough. It's hard to accept, also, he says, that it's hard to accept that something we want to believe may not exist, such as that we'll see our deceased friends and family after we die, is a good example of that. We want that so deeply to be true that many people will believe it, right? Bertrand Russell, philosopher, logician, mathematician from the late 19th, early 20th century. He would say that if he were at the gates for Judgment Day, if it turned out that God did exist, he would be kind of mad at God. He would say, well, you just didn't give us enough evidence, right? So how was I supposed to believe in God? Especially, like, how are we smart people supposed to believe in God, So I think all four of these guys, along with people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's going to say, oh, I'm an agnostic because, well, show me some evidence. Just show me some evidence. And I think there are videos on YouTube that last like 7 minutes long that basically involve him just repeating that over and over and over again like an insane person, right? So one of the fundamental questions on that note is what constitutes evidence? Well, all five of these guys that I've mentioned have the same conception of what evidence is, and that is evidence within the scientific realm. You could call it philosophical materialism. I guess I'll use the words of Rupert Sheldrake, because he put it very neatly, is that scientism, which is a very widespread belief in the academy, scientism is the belief that science already understands the nature of reality, even at its deepest philosophical level, in general, or in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in. So if you ask someone who subscribes to scientism, or puts scientism above all other belief systems, or the belief in the scientific method, however you want to say it. Is there anything that science can't answer? Any question that science can't answer? They'll say, well, no. There are plenty of things that science doesn't have an answer for now, but eventually science will be able to answer that question, no matter what it is. It could even be a moral question. And that's what the moral realists believe today, is that moral truth is nested inside what we can know empirically and scientifically, right? So what constitutes evidence for these people? Well, someone who believes in scientism, that science as a belief system, is generally going to be a materialist as well. And all of the people who I mentioned on this list are definitely materialists. And I'm not exactly sure how materialism can exist in its purest form, but maybe that's another discussion for another time. But materialism is the belief that reality is comprised of matter. That's it. Any subjective meaning, purpose, anything like that doesn't exist. Now, one problem with this is that, whenever you eliminate the subjectivity from anything, how exactly does that argument not implode on itself? Because what you mean by empiricism, empirical science, is what you can detect through your five senses, what you can experience yourself. You need to be there to hear the tree fall in the forest, to know conclusively that the tree did fall in the forest. So that's like a sort of conceptual problem, I guess, there. And if we ground what we regard as evidence as what can be reduced to our five senses, then, well, our five senses are an intersubjective system. It's something that evolves over millions and millions of years, and it becomes something. Scientific inquiry then becomes something that we cannot separate from the means by which we observe it, right? Our five senses. Okay, so also, all the new atheists really believe that this question of does God exist or not is the fundamentally important question in religion, and whether or not religion should persist as any number of its denominations or ideologies all over the world, any of its interpretations, I guess. But I don't think that the existence of God is really the issue. I think we should be exploring what is God, because a lot of these people they presuppose that they understand what the conception of God is, and God isn't, as far as I can tell, the conception of God exists in some form or another in every single religion. So it's kind of, God is more of an archetype than a person or a thing. And the concept of God certainly isn't grounded in anything material. So it's nothing that you can explore scientifically at all. He's not, or it is not a material entity. So I think the conception of God is, and what it is, what its nature is definitely up for question, and it's unknown, but so the nature of God is unknown. That's very interesting, because what I think God is a representative of the unknown, and I think that on the most specific and the most general level, right? Like God is just that thing that you fear. You fear unknown territory. You fear the road less traveled. You fear going home and dealing with your own demons in your household. Now, like, the scientific method may be extremely important to you in your work, but think about what you know, what's relevant to your life, apart from your career. Scientific questions and the methods are very important at your workplace if you're a scientist. But when you go home, you're going to have to deal with your wife and your kids and confront problems, conceptual problems with your family and your friends and and within yourself. To work through those things, we can understand even some of the details, the technical details about how certain emotions are processed in the brain and things like that. But science isn't going to tell us where those causes, where the initial causes of those emotional states came from. And usually those things are grounded in some sort of moral decision that you made, rightly or wrongly, And it's why when you, when you take your free will for granted and you make a wrong moral decision, you lie or you cheat or steal, it eats at you. You made the wrong decision. Something in your moral framework either was disrupted or there was a piece missing somewhere that didn't allow you to make that right moral decision, and that's your fault to a very large extent. You can blame it on someone else, but it's no one else's fault. It might be might be due to the circumstances or of your context, your surroundings, but anyway, another thing that the new atheists do when they discuss politics and things is they like to reduce all of the problems of the world down to religion. And everyone likes a simple explanation, I understand that, but they do it with religion specifically, and there are a bunch of deductions that you can make once you decide, okay, the fundamental problem is religion, so what else can we reduce from that? Well, lots of stuff, but it doesn't mean it's right. You know what I mean? So I think they grant religion way too much credit in that regard. But you tend to do that whenever you're blaming, when you're not taking responsibility for something yourself, or when you have you'd prefer to project the fault of certain undesirable occurrences in the world onto a system. You know, it's easy to attack a system rather than an individual or even a group of individuals, you know. And religion just happens to be that system that's trendy to blame. And that's what New Atheism does a lot of times. So, I guess that's all I'm going to say for now. I guess next video I'll probably talk a little bit about where a moral framework comes from and why atheists can have a good, you know, a decent moral framework without God or religion or some structure like that. But they'll live in ignorance as far as knowing where those structures came from, because they're sort of archetypal in nature. Anyway, yeah, that's it for now.